Today we're going to learn how to make 3D standing paper bag houses. But first, let's hear The Little House by Virginia Lee Burton to get some ideas. Our story today is The Little House. It's by Virginia Lee Burton. Once upon a time, there was a little house way out in the country. She was a pretty little house, and she was strong and well built. The man who built her so well said, "This little house shall never be sold for gold or silver, and she will live to see our great-great-grandchildren's great-great-grandchildren living in her." The little house was very happy as she sat on the hill and watched the countryside around her. She watched the sun rise in the morning, and she watched the sun set in the evening. Day followed day, one a little different from before, but the little house just stayed the same. In the nights, she watched the moon grow from a thin new moon to a full moon, then back again to a thin old moon. Then there was no moon. She watched the stars way off in the distance. She could see the lights of the city. The little house was curious about the city and wondered what it would be like to live there. Time passed quickly for the little house as she watched the countryside slowly change with the seasons. In the spring, when the days grew longer and the sun warmer, she waited for the first robin to return from the south. She watched the green grass turn green. She watched the buds on the trees swell and the apples trees burst into blossom. She watched the children playing in the brook. In the long summer days, she sat in the sun and watched the trees cover themselves with leaves and the white daisies cover the hill. She watched the gardens grow, and she watched the apples turn red and ripen. She watched the children swimming in the pool. In the fall, when the days grew shorter and the nights grew colder, she watched the first frost turn the leaves to bright yellow and red and orange. She watched the harvest gathered and the apples picked. She watched the children going back to school. In the winter, when the nights were long and the days were short and the countryside was covered with snow, she watched the children coasting and skating. Year followed year. The apple trees grew old and new ones were planted. The children grew up and went away to the city. And now, at night, the lights of the city seemed brighter and closer. One day, the little house was surprised to see a horseless carriage coming down the winding country road. Pretty soon there were more of them on the road and fewer carriages pulled by horses. Pretty soon came some surveyors and surveyed a line in front of the little house. Pretty soon along came a steam shovel and dug a road through the hill covered with daisies. Then some trucks came and dumped big stones on the road. Then some trucks came with little stones. Then some trucks came with tar and sand. And finally a steamroller came through and rolled it all smooth, and the road was done. Now the little house watched the trucks and automobiles going back and forth to the city. Gasoline stations, roadside stands, and small houses followed the new road. Everyone and everything moved much faster now than before. More roads were made, and the countryside was divided into lots. More houses, bigger houses, apartment houses, tenement houses, schools, stores, and garages spread over the land and crowded the little house. No one wanted to live in her and take care of her anymore. She couldn't be sold for silver or gold, so she just stayed there and watched. Now it was not so quiet and peaceful at night. Now the lights of the city were bright and very close, and the street lights shone all night. This must be living in the city, thought the little house, and didn't know whether she liked it or not. She missed the field of daisies and the apple trees dancing in the moonlight. Pretty soon, there were trolley cars going back and forth in front of the little house. They went back and forth all day and part of the night. Everyone seemed to be very busy and everyone seemed to be in a hurry. Pretty soon, there was an elevated train going back and forth above the little house. The air was filled with dust and smoke, and the noise was loud. It shook the little house. Now she couldn't tell when spring came, or summer, or fall, or winter. It all seemed about the same. Pretty soon there was a subway going back and forth underneath the little house. She couldn't see it, but she could feel it and hear it. People were moving faster and faster. No one noticed the little house anymore. They hurried by without a glance. Pretty soon, they tore down the apartment houses and tenement houses around the little house and started digging big cellars on each side. The steam shovels dug down 3 stories on one side and 4 stories on the other. Pretty soon they started building up. They built 25 stories on one side and 35 stories on the other. Now the little house only saw the sun at noon and didn't see the moon or stars at all at night. Because of the lights of the city, they were too bright. She didn't like living in the city. At night, she used to dream of the country and the field of daisies and the apple trees dancing in the moonlight. The little house was very lonely and sad. Her paint was cracked and dirty. Her windows were broken. Her shutters hung crookedly. She looked shabby, though she was just as good a house underneath as ever. Then one fine spring morning along came the great-great-granddaughter of the man who built the little house so well. She saw the shabby little house but didn't hurry by. There was something about the little house that made her stop and look again. She said to her husband, "That little house looks just like the little one my grandmother lived in when she was a little girl. Only that house was way out in the country, on a hill covered with daisies and apple trees growing all around." They found out it was the very same house. So they went to the movers to see if the little house could be moved. The movers looked the house all over and said, "Sure, this house is as good as ever. She's built so well, we could move her anywhere." So they jacked up the house and put her on wheels. Traffic was held up for hours as they slowly moved her out of the city. At first, the little house was frightened, but after she got used to it, she rather liked it. They rolled along the big road. They rolled along the little roads until they were way out in the country. When the little house saw the green grass and heard the birds singing, she didn't feel sad anymore. They went along and along, and they couldn't seem to find just the right place. They tried the little house here, and they tried her there. Finally, they saw a hill in the middle of a field and apple trees growing around. "There," said the great-great-granddaughter, "that's just the place." "Yes, it is," said the little house to herself. A cellar was dug on top of the hill, and slowly they moved the house from the road to the hill. The windows and shutters were fixed, and once again they painted her a lovely shade of pink. As the little house settled down on her new foundation, she smiled happily. Once again she could watch the sun and moon and stars. Once again she could watch spring and summer and fall and winter come and go. Once again she was lived in and taken care of. Never again would she be curious about the city. Never again would she want to live there. The stars twinkled above her. A new moon was coming up. It was spring, and all was quiet and peaceful in the country. The end. Hi, today we're going to be working on our paper bag houses. What we're going to need to make a paper bag is a little lunch bag, okay, some extra newspaper or any paper that you might have that you can stuff it with, some scissors, some color paper for a roof, a pencil, and maybe a marker, okay? And then something for color and also a stapler, okay? So we're gonna start with our paper bag. We're gonna start on the side that doesn't have the flap up. The flap is the bottom of the bag. So we're gonna start with this flap that's not on the bottom of the bag, okay? And I want you to draw the front of your house. Think about what you want the front of your house to look like. But for the first step is to draw a line across here, because the top of your bag is gonna get rolled down to put the roof on. Okay, so let's start with our window and the cat. Then it's time to think about what would you like to have on the back of your house. My back of my house is going to show the backyard and what might be in the backyard. So I'm going to turn it over, and now I can see the bottom of that bag right there, and I want to get that out of the way. So I'm going to flip it over to the front that I've already drawn. And I'm going to want to add lots of color. I used crayon and markers for mine. You use whatever you have and color the front and the back, okay? Then we need to think about making our roof. To make our roof, you can use a piece of printer paper, either color or not. We're gonna hold it in the hamburger direction, and we're gonna lay our bag on top of it just to see how wide we want that roof to be. We're gonna draw a little line like this, and we're gonna cut right on that line. And move the rest of it away. Then we're gonna fold that piece of color paper in half. And if yours is still a little bit too long, and I think mine is, I'm gonna cut off, leaving it folded just a piece about that big, because I don't want that roof to cover up too much of my house. Then we're going to want to plan how we're going to draw our shingles on. The shingles are what the roof is made out of. It also is going to give a little texture to our house. Come time to put our whole house together. And what we're going to be doing is taking the bag that we've added color to. So whether you use crayons or markers, color pencils, or all three, you're going to open up your lunch bag like this, so it stands up nicely and the bottom's nice and flat. Then you're going to take a piece of paper and crumple it up. You can take one, maybe two at the most, because you don't want to stuff it. A piece of newspaper or craft paper that you're not using. Crumple it up, put it inside your bag, carefully because you don't want to tear it, and then push it all the way down to the bottom of your bag, like that. Then you're going to pretend like you're folding it back up again, which you are, anyway, and I'm going to fold it once, and twice, and maybe even 3 times, okay, to make a nice band at the top, like that. Check front and back to make sure your house looks nice. We're going to set that roof on top like this. We're going to add a stapler or two to keep your roof on, and then you'll have a really nice house that can stand up for you. Okay, have fun with it.